1876, a story began in the scrub hills east of Helena that never made it into school books. Wagons creaked in at dusk. A wind ripped the prayer flags off the small chapel and scattered them across the hard pan. The Donnelly family stopped at the spring, drew water in silence, and watched the town watch them back. No one waved. No one smiled. That was the first pattern. People looked. The Donnellys did not look back. Patrick Donnelly stood in the road like a stake hammered into the earth. He was thin and restless. He measured every man on the street with the same quick glance, the way a rancher counts heads. Mary stayed on the wagon seat. She held a baby under her shawl and pressed her lips together until they whitened. 7 children clustered around the wheels, barefoot despite the frost. Too quiet, too watchful. The oldest boy, Eamon, scanned everything. The youngest, Maeve, stared at the spring and blinked slow, like she was trying to wake up inside a dream. They bought flour and salt. They bartered a tin of nails for a coil of rope. Patrick asked for directions to any land that hadn't been picked over by cattlemen. The storekeeper told him about a patch in the foothills where the soil was thin and the wind was thicker. Patrick nodded once. That was enough. He drove them up the rutted trail and disappeared into the junipers. On the first night, a coyote yipped from a ridge. Then it yelped once. The sound chopped off mid-breath. In the morning, a miner found its body on the trail, neck bent at a clean right angle. People said it was a catamount. People said it was a trap. People said nothing when Eamon walked past town later with 2 pelts in his pack and no rifle on his shoulder. They built a cabin from crooked logs. They set the door toward the ridge and the windows toward nothing. Smoke rose in a thin line and disappeared, like it knew not to linger. Patrick planted potatoes and fenced a rough pen. Mary dug a cold pit under the floor and lined it with canvas. The children hauled water and cut willow switches. At night, candles burned late. Voices rose and fell. Sometimes they sang in Irish. Sometimes they didn't sound like songs. Autumn turned hard without asking. Snow arrived early and ignored the calendar. Water buckets froze with a glass slick sheen. The valley listened to itself. There were fewer footfalls in the street at dusk. Men spoke softer in the saloon. Swarming pulled children inside before the sun reached the black line of the hills. The Donnellys came down only to trade meat. They never asked for news. They never stayed for coffee. They handed over wrapped cuts, nodded and left. By December, the first rumor had a name. It belonged to the preacher's wife, who told her friend that Mary's eyes went black in church. No whites, no color, just a flat dark shine like a puddle under a slate cloud. She collapsed a minute later in the aisle, stood up by herself, and walked out without touching a pew. She left the baby on the floor and didn't look back. Eamon collected the child and followed. The door closed. The hymn rose again, thin and shaky. A rancher came in one night with a story about the upper trail. He said he heard a cry near the Donnelly place that wasn't human. It was high and carried forever, and it didn't stop for breath. He tried to laugh as he told it, but the laugh fell flat on the table. He went home sober. He didn't ride that way again. In 1878, fire took the first cabin. The flames started while the wind lay down and slept. It climbed into the roof, as if it knew the ladder. A boy in town saw the glow and rang the bell. Men ran with buckets and shouted names. By the time they reached the ridge, the house was a square of light, the windows black holes. The Donnelly family stood in the yard in a straight line. They didn't cough. They didn't cry. They didn't even look at the flames. Each child held the hand of another, like they expected to be counted. When the roof fell in and sent up a pillar of sparks, Patrick nodded as if the fire had finished its work on time. "We take care of our own," he said. That line bit into the town and stayed. They rebuilt in the same place. Thicker walls, fewer windows. The door sat heavier on its hinges. A month later, A drift formed against the north wall and never melted. All winter it sat there, made of freeze and shadow, and something else, and the ground around their yard held no tracks for days at a time after storms. People noticed. People pretended not to. The children grew fast in the wrong directions. Rowan shot up and banged his head on the lintel. Bridget stayed small and moved like a cat that had learned to walk as a person. Siobhan's fingers were long and her feet flat. Connor's shoulders hunched forward even when he lay down. Speech came late and then came in bursts. The younger ones listened more than they talked. They watched each other the way wolves watched the snow line. They learned without being taught. A doctor from Helena rode up in 81, when a merchant told him there was a child with a twisted spine. The doctor's name was Leary. He wore a coat too fine for the road and had a mustache that curled like a promise. He left town before dawn with a leather bag and a book of notes. By noon a gust kicked sand across the yard. By dusk his horse wandered back to town with a torn saddle and dried foam on its neck. There was blood on the strap. It wasn't a lot. It was enough. Sheriff Hale asked questions in the saloon, but he never rode up to the cabin. He wrote the name Leary in a ledger and underlined it twice. He closed the ledger like a coffin lid. The Donnellys stopped coming down after that. Eamon traded pelts by leaving a bundle on a stump and taking flour from the barrel by the door. He left change in coins stacked in a careful little tower. Heads up. The storekeeper never saw him arrive, and never saw him go. The bell over the door didn't ring, but the pile of flour got shorter, and the coins vanished. The town pretended this was normal. That pretended normal burned like coal under a floor. As claims turned into camps and camps turned into towns, paper started to matter. Taxes, school rolls, baptism records. The family refused all of it. They would not sign. They would not hand over birth names. They would not sit in a pew. They would not send a child to the one-room schoolhouse. The teacher tried once. She walked up with a satchel and an apple. She came back at dark with neither. She kept her job for one more season, and left without saying goodbye. People went missing on the back road. Not many. Enough. A tinker with a cart loaded with tinware. A trapper with a scar under his eye. A hand who fought dirty at cards and lost often. Each vanished into the split between two ridges near the Donnelly place. A rider would see their smoke 1 minute, and the wind would turn the next. When the smoke drifted back, no one stood in the yard. By 1892, patience thinned like rope over a beam. 12 men stepped out of the saloon one night with torches and rifles. They went to the blacksmith for nails, and to the church for whispered prayers. They rode single file. The moon sat low and slid behind a cloud. They tied their horses to junipers, and walked the last stretch. Their boots made no sound in the Idaho fescue. When they reached the yard, the door was open, and the house glowed with candlelight. They saw faces inside. They did not see fear. The men entered and stopped as one. 30 Donnellys stood shoulder to shoulder, faces pale as smoke, eyes that didn't blink, bodies that didn't fit the way bodies should. A boy's legs bent too much at the knees, a woman's jaw too square to belong to a woman, a man with arms long enough to rest his hands on his thighs without bending, children with fingers webbed at the base, held low hidden by skirts, twins that did not look like twins the first second, and did the second after that. The air smelled like tallow and iron. It tasted like a penny pressed to the tongue. Patrick stepped forward by a single pace. "We take care of our own," he said again. The sheriff was not there. The preacher was not there. The men with guns were there, but not one of them lifted a rifle. The oldest of them, Briggs, took off his hat. It kept his hands busy. No one spoke for a long time. The candles burned down a little. Someone swallowed. The flames did not flicker. The wind waited outside. No shot was fired. No arrest made. The message traveled without words. The town heard. The family heard it too. Within weeks the smoke rolled later each day. Then it didn't roll at all. The garden went to seed. The fence fell inward. Snow came early again, and no footprints crossed the yard. In spring, a prospector named Teller swore he found a trail north scarred with wagon ruts that faded into rock near the border. He said he slept one night and felt eyes on his back and woke to a pile of stacked cans around his bed. He left the way he came and told no one until he was drunk. A legend needs air. People gave it air. The Donnellys scattered into clouds and took their secrets with them. The valley healed the way skin heals over a piece of glass left under it. It looks whole. It is not. People continued to vanish now and then. Coyotes still cried and went silent in the same hour. A new family moved onto the ridge and left before harvest. They were decent, but the house made their hands shake. The father dreamed of a woman singing in a language his mother never knew. The mother dreamed of ice in the pantry that would not melt. The daughter started to speak at night only, and forgot her words in daylight. They sold the claim and did not ask for their money back. In 1910, a prospector with a busted ankle and a mind full of maps limped into a camp with a story that made other men believe things they shouldn't. He said he crossed the bitter route and found a camp tucked into a bowl of stone where the sun never reached the floor. He saw people moving there with white faces and dark eyes. He watched a woman cut a rope with her teeth. He listened to a man pray in a voice that sounded like two voices. He left before they saw him. Or maybe they saw him and let him go to carry the rumor in his mouth like a lit match. The First World War came and left. The Second came and measured the country in lists, draft records, censuses, names on paper. Still no one could pin a Donnelly to a line and make it stay. The name went underground, or sideways or into a ditch. Sometimes it became Donnelly or O'Donnell or Conley and then turned back again 2 towns later. Sometimes a baby with pale eyes showed up in a county that never saw Montana, and the mother would not say a word about the father. In the 1930s, a farmer near the Canadian border traded flour for pelts with a family that never came closer than the split rail fence. He remembered a girl with a braid as thick as a rope who had a thumb that bent too far at the joint. He remembered the man with her whose hands were raw and cracked and too steady for the cold. He remembered the woman who did not blink when the wind threw snow in her face. He told the state man when he came around to ask questions. The state man wrote it down and left the paper in a drawer to sleep. In the 1950s, hunters followed tracks in the Kootenai that started as boot prints and became something like bare feet and then faded into leaf mold. A team of surveyors heard a woman singing in the next gulch and found only a hummingbird caught in a web. A school teacher on a hike picked up a locket by a spring. Inside was a curl of hair pale as straw and bound in red thread that left a stain. She wore it to church once and woke the next morning to find it gone. The chain broken but still around her neck. She moved to Missoula and married a man who cooked her breakfast every Sunday until he didn't. By the 1970s, science started catching up to whispers. DNA became a word people said without understanding. A graduate student named Eliza Hart, who had grown up 3 valleys away, came home with a grant and a stubborn streak. She pushed into county records and church logs. She wrote letters to women with maiden names that matched names on stones. She asked midwives for stories. She asked the undertaker for lists. She mapped births and deaths and infant graves into patterns that made her lose sleep. She found clusters where there shouldn't be clusters. She found pairs where there shouldn't be pairs. She found years with no baptisms and many burials. She scribbled on a wall-sized map until it looked like a spider got drunk and fell asleep on paper. She drove to the ridge and parked where the path vanished. She walked in with a pack and a camera and a notebook. She found the second cabin's foundation under a mat of moss. She found a circle of stone smoke blackened on the underside. She found a buckle no one had polished and a spoon bent like a question mark. She stayed until dusk and then stayed until dark. She wrote that something moved outside the ring of trees without making sound.
She wrote that her breath turned to frost even in August inside that ring. She wrote that she heard a lullaby in Irish and tried not to cry because she did not want to answer it. Eliza collected hair from brushes found in abandoned shacks. She collected buttons and threads. She collected a comb with teeth missing and a smear of old oil across the back. She collected stories and placed them where evidence should be. She sent what she could to a lab 3 states away. The lab sent back words she expected and words she did not. Inbreeding causes trouble. Everyone knows that now. The lab found markers that said the trouble had gone on too long. The lab found variants that didn't look like variants. The lab hinted at something else. A cluster of traits that shouldn't cluster that tightly. Fingers webbed at the base. Slight polydactyly on the left hand across 2 branches of a tree. Jaw asymmetry that repeated like a stamp. Hearts that beat slow under stress. A tolerance for cold. A disposition for silence. Eliza wrote a paper. It was dry because it had to be. She spoke at a conference to a half-full room. She said the word consanguinity and watched 2 men shift in their seats. She said isolate and founder effect and closed population. She never said the family name. It felt like a curse. It felt like a promise. She told no ghost stories. She told only what the numbers let her tell. Then she drove back, parked and walked toward the ridge again. She believed the data would talk if she stood where the old door had been and waited. She was right. It talked. It used the wind. Eliza met a boy on the trail. He stood in the middle like he had always stood in the middle of trails and dared wagons to split and go around him. He was 15 or maybe 18. He was thin and tall. His hair was black. His eyes didn't shine, they absorbed. He looked at her boots, her bag, her hands, her jaw. He said, "You looking for a story?" Not like a question, like a diagnosis. She nodded. He said, "I have one." Then he walked into the trees. She followed because there was nothing else to do. The shadows fit him. The path shaped itself around his feet. They reached a clearing that wasn't a clearing until he stopped. There were stones that might have been placed and might have been rolled. There were bones that might have been deer and might have been something else. There was a rope looped over a branch that might have been for hanging meat and might have been for another job. He sat on a stump. She stayed standing. He told her a story without hurry. The family left because they were asked without being asked. They moved at night and slept in ditches and caves. They kept children quiet by teaching them not to cough. They traded at fence lines with men who pretended not to look. They found places where the sun moved slow and stayed there. They married their own because no one else would have them, and because they did not ask for pity. They called it duty, and kept the word clean. They broke under it anyway. He said a name that might have been his and might have been the one he wore for strangers. He said his mother had fingers webbed at the base, and could gut a fish in the dark without a blade. He said his uncle had a jaw that clicked when he slept and woke at any sound softer than a breath. He said his sister sang without opening her mouth. He said his father taught him to count by breaking twigs. He said he had never seen the ocean, and did not want to. He said he had never eaten bread that was not baked by a woman with his blood. He said he wanted to leave and had never moved far enough to test the wanting. Eliza asked for a sample. He held out his hand, palm up. She pricked his finger with a needle and caught the drop before it fell. He didn't wince. He watched the glass fill and stayed still. She asked if she could take a photograph. He said yes with his mouth and no with his eyes. She put the camera away. He stood and said, "We take care of our own." And she felt the line like a thread pulled tight in her chest. Then he turned and she was alone. She found her way back to the car at dusk, only because the wind threw a handful of cold toward her with every misstep. The lab sent a letter, rare variants, a signature that echoed across cousins who were also siblings who were also something else. A cluster seen in island populations and mountain valleys and nowhere else. The report read like a map you aren't allowed to own. It could not say what the paper could not prove. It could only point in a direction and stop. Eliza sat with it on her table and pressed her palm to it as if heat would fuse the questions into answers. She filed the data and kept the rest. She did not publish the boy. She did not publish the clearing. She did not publish the rope. She married a man who liked to drive without music. They had a daughter whose hands were steady, and whose eyes were steady, and who did not mind the cold. The daughter grew and asked questions that made dinner quiet. Eliza answered what she could and taught the rest, as you teach a child to listen for a storm you cannot see. Time is a thief that leaves receipts. The 1990s came in with noise. The ridge stayed quiet. A hiker with a brand new pack and brand new boots and a brand new opinion about wilderness walked into the wrong stretch of afternoon. He came back 3 days later without his boots, without his opinion, and without a piece of his left ear. He said he fell. He said he never fell. He said he saw a house that was not there and a girl in the window that was not a window and heard a song that did not pass through air. He moved to Arizona and sold cars. He smiled too wide and too often. A deputy in 2003 followed a tip about a camp with stolen livestock. He tracked across a dry creek and into a bowl where the sun stopped halfway down the wall and thought better of it. He found nothing. He found a set of prints that started as boots and ended as bare feet, and then ended. He found a dead coyote laid out straight as a ruler with its paws crossed. He found his own name carved shallow into a trunk 5 minutes after he said it out loud. He went home and changed his job. I came to the ridge because the story refused to stop. My grandfather had told it when the lamp threw shadows on the ceiling. He said he saw a woman on the trail with a child on her hip who looked at him as if she could see the marrow in his bones. He kept walking and did not look back. He married my grandmother that fall and never crossed the ridge again. He died with a piece of the song in his throat. He hummed the same 3 notes until he stopped breathing. My father said it was a joke. My father did not go to the funeral. I parked my truck where the road became memory. I carried rope, a flask, 3 maps, and a knife I did not know how to use. I carried my grandfather's locket because it was the only thing I had touched that had touched the story. I walked until the sun made the ridge look like a jawbone. I walked until my breath made its own small cloud. I reached the foundation stones at the place where people always stop pretending. I stood on the threshold and said my name and heard it come back from the trees a little different. The wind turned cold on my cheeks. I knew the temperature did not change. My body changed. I learned that the air can make decisions without your consent. I stepped into the rectangle where a floor had been and felt the boards that were not there bend under the weight I did not have in other places. I took 3 more steps and my throat closed, not all the way, just enough to remind me that I would not be the one to decide when I breathed. I set down the locket on the rock that had been the hearth. I said the 7 names I knew: Patrick, Mary, Eamon, Sheoban, Bridget, Rowan, Maeve. I waited. I had never waited the way I waited then, which is to say without time. I heard a lullaby. It did not come through my ears. It came through bone. It was soft and hard at once. It did not announce itself. It was already there. The words had no edges. The melody had 3 steps and then fell and then got up and then went home. I stood still because moving felt like drowning. The song said we take care of our own. It said it in a way that explained everything and excused nothing. I did not cry. My body did something else that felt like crying in another language. I do not know how long I stood there. When I could move, I picked up the locket and put it back over my head. The chain was warm. It should not have been warm. I turned to go and saw a boy at the edge of the trees. He was thin. He was tall. His eyes absorbed. He nodded. I nodded back. He raised his right hand and pressed his thumb into the space between his ring finger and pinky. I understood only later that he was showing me the web. He spoke without voice. He said the line. He said the family does not need forgiveness. It needs absence. He said the ridge belongs to them because no one else will take it when it is like this. He said they keep to themselves because when you live inside a room full of mirrors, you stop wanting to see another face. You cannot love without also loving what built it. He said they do not hunt men. He said they do not ask to be hunted. He said both things can be true and still people go missing. He said leave. He did not need to repeat it. I left because I am not brave in the way brave people are and because I understood what duty felt like for the first time. It feels like a heavy coin you cannot spend that still drags your pocket down. It feels like a song that refuses to forget you. It feels like being counted by a face you will never see twice. I went home. I wrote what I could and kept what I couldn't. I listened for the notes when the house settled. I heard them. I pretended I didn't. I read Eliza Hart's paper in a library where the carpet ate sound. I found her email and never wrote. I walked past a boy on a city street who looked at my hands and then at my throat, and then at my eyes and kept walking and never looked back. I slept without dreaming for a month. Then I dreamed every night of a room with candles and faces that didn't blink and a man saying the line. I woke up saying it. The words fit in my mouth like my own teeth. People want answers. They want a culprit. They want a map with an X. They want science to close the door that ghost stories open. They want folklore to be seasoning and not meat. The Donnelly story refuses all of that. It sits in the space between explanation and warning. It is a ledger with sums that never balance. It is a family that did what families do when the world will not have them. They stayed with each other. They paid the cost. They passed the cost down. Some of them left. Some of them didn't. The ridge holds both truths without flinching. You can stand on that threshold and feel two histories at once. One is the one people repeat because it keeps children close to the house at dusk. The other is the one that lives under the first and keeps breathing. You feel the weight of names that were not written. You feel the ache of bodies that learned to survive with what they had. You feel the wrongness that comes when blood loops back on itself too many times. You feel the stubborn dignity that refuses pity. You feel the anger that has no address. You feel the song. There are modern theories that would fit here. Found as isolates. Thrift. You could stack them on the hearth like a pile of neat books and point. The pile would not change the air. It would not add a window to the wall. It would not take a finger apart and reknit it unwebbed. It would not turn a closed circle into an open line. It might make you feel better for a day. It will not keep you from hearing a lullaby on a trail where there should be no music. Sometimes hikers in Montana still report pale faces in the trees. Sometimes they hear a voice in the wind calling a name they didn't tell the wind. Sometimes they find a dead coyote stretched straight and clean, paws crossed, eyes closed by a hand that knew how to close eyes properly. Sometimes they find nothing and leave with too much. Sometimes they come back with nothing and leave it all behind. The map fills with stories that never meet at corners and still draw the same shape. A friend asked me if I would camp there again. A better friend did not ask. I know what I would do. I would take off my boots at the line where the floor used to be and set them side by side. I would stand with my feet on the cold ground and feel the wood that is no longer there and the weight of footsteps that still walk. I would say the names. I would wait. If the song came, I would listen. If it didn't, I would leave. I would not stay to force anything. I would not take a photograph. I would not ask for a lock of hair. I would not turn duty into theft. If you want neat endings, do not come here. If you want a clean villain, do not come here. If you want to be right, do not come here. If you want to feel the edge where love and harm blur and breed, come to the ridge once and only once. Bring nothing you cannot afford to lose. Leave more than you brought. Do not look back until you are past the creek bed. When you look back you will see nothing. That is the right thing to see. I will tell you what my grandfather would not say out loud. He knew one of them. He helped him fix a wheel when he was young and angry. He ate bread in the yard of the second cabin and drank water from a dipper that had touched too many mouths to count. He heard the song and followed it home like a line dropped into a lake. He did not talk about it because there is a line between story and betrayal. He stayed on the side that let him sleep. He did not sleep well. He died humming the 3 notes. The sound made sense to him even as his senses left. That is either comfort or a curse. I do not get to decide which. The Donnelly family does not belong to the country. It does not belong to the county. It does not belong to the people who whisper their name in saloons and kitchens and classrooms. It belongs to itself. That is the tragedy. That is the shield. That is the thing that made the mystery and keeps it alive when it should have starved. They were marked by blood and by choice and by the choices other people made for them. They carried it, they carry it still. They take care of their own. Would you camp alone in those woods knowing they might still be there? Would you sit on the threshold and wait? Would you say their names and mean it? Would you go if they asked you to go? Would you leave a pair of boots side by side as a courtesy? Would you admit the song is beautiful? Would you trust yourself to hear it and leave anyway? Would you look at your hands under cold air and see anything that doesn't belong to you? Would you tell the story after? Would you tell it straight? I am telling it as straight as I can. I am not adding shine. I am not selling fear. I am not giving you a monster. I am giving you a family. It is the most disturbing mystery because it is built out of ordinary parts. Hunger, winter, pride, shame, loyalty, silence, stubborn survival. You could pick these up anywhere and build something softer. They built this. It stands. It breathes. It refuses to die in your mouth when you try to name it wrong. It asks for only one thing. Leave them alone. Leave them and their ridge and their rope and their cold and their candles. Let them take care of their own. If you go anyway, and you might watch for the cold that arrives without weather. Watch for your breath leaving too slow. Watch for the wind that spells your name with pine needles. Watch for the boy who nods without smiling. Watch for the place where your boots sink into boards that aren't there. Watch for the urge to hum. Watch for the way your hands look different when you hold them up in that light. Watch for your own patience thinning and returning like a tide you forgot existed. Watch for your fear turning into respect. Watch for respect turning into understanding. Watch for it stopping there and not going further. Do not let it go further. You will want to ask a question at the end. The question will be small and sharp. It will be a key. It will not open anything. The wind will carry it a few feet and drop it at your boots. You will bend down to pick it up and realize it was never yours. You will stand and put your hands in your pockets and feel the coin you cannot spend, and the locket you should not wear, and the map with no X. You will walk away. The song will follow for a few steps and stop. You will keep walking because that is what legs are for.